Ready to get the inside scoop on equity funding? Tune into TDJ Equity Funding Insiders Podcast for an in-depth look at what it takes to access financial capital and maximize your investments. Hear from experienced professionals, including bankers, underwriters, loan officers, and industry experts as they share their unfiltered stories and valuable lessons on securing funds.
TDJ Equity Funding Insiders Podcast. Welcome to our podcast today. And I am Jacquelyn Jackson, your host. Today, we're going to be talking about real estate investing funding. So we're looking at those that want to purchase or get into real estate investing. You want to purchase houses, or you want to rehab, or you want to get some as cash flows. Either way, you'll like to have some money, or at least know how to go about that money. So today, co-host, we have a special guest, which is Chris Cardenas, and he's a loan officer from Connecticut that works with private lending, a direct lender that can help us. So let's dive in to the wisdom and knowledge that Chris has for us today. Welcome, Chris, to our show.
Hi, Jackie. How you doing? Thanks for having me today.
Okay, can you start off and let us know a little bit about your experience with your industry and what you guys actually do?
Yeah. So as a private money lender, we specialize in funding real estate transactions, 1 to 4 units, fix and flip for, or more commonly known as short term, and also for the long term products for stabilized properties that, that are turnkey ready and are ready to be rented. So that's our bread and butter, those two right there. We also do dive into, some ground up, also some multi-units along with the short term, but our bread and butter, as you can tell from maybe the rest of the market, 1 to 4s are kind of what a lot of people love getting into.
Which is a great point that we need to make sure that our listeners are aware that when you do commercial real estate, which is buildings, strip malls, and those types are different from real estate investing from just the single family home or the duplex or the fourplex or whatever. That's something that they have to know is different. So that's what we're talking about today. So please understand what we talk on is mainly dealing with that. So with that in mind, what I wanted to start off with some questions that some of our listeners and clients have asked us to ask you. And one of them was being that what is the most important factor for borrowers when considering funding options? What do you think is the most important factor they need to consider and why?
That's a good question. And I think it's probably one of the most important questions, because when we look at the type of funding that they're getting on the short term versus the long term, right? So let's say on a fix and flip, we're going to look at loan to values. Are you getting a really high leverage up front, right? The good side about that is when you get high leverages up front, you don't have to bring that much of a down payment, right? And then on top of that, you also have a little more cash in your pocket, when you're looking at rehab in the property, right? And then when you move into the long term, it's kind of the same scenario, looking at getting the higher leverages, but the rate there is going to be really something important when it comes to finalizing the deal structures between those two, right? So for short term, the leverages, what's the highest you can get? Rate, kind of not. That to me, rates are rates on short term. You're paying interest only on most of those terms. On the long term, the rate is important because you're locking in at a 30-year escrowed mortgage. Most private money lenders escrow, so your rate there and your interest are going to be important on choosing. So depending on the product, I think more than anything, choosing wisely and doing your homework between lenders, because there's 15 lenders, 30 lenders.
Right.
You got to really choose which one fits your budget better, right?
Okay. Exactly. And I can understand that. That's happening. So when we're talking about the fix and flip, which you're discussing that, and then we're going to talk about the long term. So on fix and flip, you said something about the leverage. If your leverage is better, then you can get some better numbers. So what do you mean when you say that, when they need to have their leverage in that property better? What are they looking at? What are you looking at?
So what I'm looking at, right, is, let's say for a new investor, right?
Okay.
Let's say you have different lenders that are willing to take on new investors, said with whatever guidelines they have to give you funding, right? So for us, if you bring a new investor, the terms are going to be between 70 to 80%. So you're either bringing around 20% up to 30% down payment, right?
Okay.
Let's say you find a lender that says, you know what, I'll give you lending for 15%, but your rate's going to be 15%, right?
Okay.
So you really got to look at the pros and cons of the options that you're being given. To me, for the new investors, they should be looking at 25%. You're new in the game. You got to get some skin in the game as well. And your exit strategy, whether it's to refi or sell, it's going to be a little more secure because you put down 25%. So that equity is there, and when you go cash out, you're going to have that available.
And see, I think that's a good point because as loan brokers, and you know too as well, we've had these discussions. We would have someone come and they say, "Well, hey, your lender, you only can give me I have to put 30% down, but I got a guy to say all I got to do is put 10%." But then, like you said, when we looked at that interest rate, his interest rate was actually about 4 or 5 points higher than what was offered for probably you guys or who we had. So we understand how important it is, and I think as new investors or even investors that's just been in it for a minute, they really need to look at everything, like you said, all the leverage. So you got to look at the loan to value they're willing to give you. You got to look at the interest rate, and something you said also we'll go into when you're talking about long term, how important the interest rate is. Like I have to tell people, temporarily, if you're doing a long term, a short term, it's gonna be higher than if you do a rental long term for its interest rate. So that's the thing with that. So definitely explain to us when it go to long term, what do we need to look at when we are doing a long term? Let's go detail in that.
Yeah. So once a property is ready for its, most important phase, which is cash flowing, looking at the rates, looking at where you're at, looking at where your portfolio of properties is at is going to be important because a lot of times the seasoned investors, the ones that have been in the game 10, 15 years, that have 10, 15 properties, they don't really care about rates. Right? They really don't. Why? Because they have 15 cash flowing properties. So if they miss out on one that they're buying new and they're paying like $80 extra in interest, it's nothing to them, right? A lot of these real estate seasoned investors, they know what it is. But for a new investor that's starting out, you're trying to start your portfolio. You're starting out, let's say, with a property that's worth $100,000, right? A 7% rate, a 6.5% rate, that could be $80 difference. You can say, what's $80? Sure. What's $80 different is basically after 12 months, that's about $960 if my math is correct. And let's say your payment is $800. That's a whole payment right there.
Right.
And as you're trying to build up, right, because eventually you're going to want to build more properties. You're going to want to get more. So eventually the numbers when you're starting really do add up. I sometimes take the analogy and tell people, hey, look, when you go to a gas pump and you see 350, right? But then you go down the street and you're getting 310, right? If you put in, a full tank, 15 gallons, you do the math, it adds up. It could be a whole gallon less or it could be a whole gallon more. So determining the starting phase for the new investors is important. And in my opinion, I know a lot of people are going to say, hey, rates don't matter to me. Getting a good stabilized rate when you're starting out is important because once you get going, once you have 5 properties, 6 properties, don't worry about the rate. I got five good properties with decent rates, cash flowing, so everything just kind of adds up.
Right, exactly. And I agree with that from a loan broker. And we also tell them too as well, Chris, and we've talked about it, is that like you said, when you mentioned budget, let's say that's part of leverage too. You can't take advice from everybody. Like you said, seasoned people have a different agenda of what they're looking for. And a lot of
Oh
time we
yeah.
get the ones starting out and they like, well, I want to be, it doesn't matter to me as much, but it does if this is your only house you have and the first one you're doing, you have to understand if something happened and that construction site go a little longer, you're going to be paying longer for that. And that's where he already has some money somewhere reserved where he can deal with that. So we have to be careful of who we get advice from. That's why we have this podcast. So people can understand you're talking to the direct lenders. There's nobody talking out their trunk, sitting on the corner. You're talking to a lender that deals with that every day and you know what you're looking at. Now, when we talked about budget, talk to them about budget. How do they figure out what budget works for them? That's something they need to understand how that works.
Now, budget-wise for like buy-in, for flips, which kind of budget do you want me to elaborate on?
Well, I guess let's go with budget-wise as far as investing and putting down. Because as you know, so many people hear that I can get this property with no money down. How many times we've heard that? So my thing would be, I'm like, wow, it's on. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying people not doing it, but for the massive of us that's doing real estate investing, you're going to have to come with something down to have it. So I guess what I'm saying is more like the budget. If you say 20,000, let's say $1,000, $100,000 for a house. And if you're saying you're required, Jackie, to put 30,000 down or 30%, if I don't have 30,000 in the bank, plus closing, then I don't have a budget for that $100,000 house. So that's what I'm saying. So we say budget, how is important to realize, and what do you think that's rated on as far as what down payment they have to do? What are you all looking at to determine how much they have to put down?
So right now, our guidelines are more focused on credit, right? So back when, in the height of COVID, rates were so cheap. Rates were so low that, we were lending at like 660 credit. People were getting like a 4.5%, but the floor rate was 3.49, right? 3.75.
Right.
But now, when I'm looking at how we do things, we focus more on credit, right? And a lot of people sometimes say, why are you guys looking at my credit? Well, we have to, because when you don't have a tenant in there, the person who has to pay the property is you.
That's right.
It's not like the property is just going to send us a check or something, right? So we have to look at, how you pay your dues, Right. So when I look at individuals or, when I get scenarios, and we obviously have our size or our estimate that tells us, okay, this is a $100,000 house. They got to bring $35,000, right? As a loan officer, when the sizer tells me $35,000, that's the minimum. I want to see at least a 15% cushion there, right?
Right.
So, like for your example, right, $100,000, right? You got to bring a down payment. Somebody doesn't, they want to bring 30%, but they don't have it, So it just kind of depends on the scenario. But I always want to see a little cushion above the minimum, right? Because worst case scenario, a pipe breaks. Worst case scenario, something happens. Worst case scenario, after we close, there's a big leak with the sewer or something, and that's $30,000, and you got to get it fixed. And so where's the cushion? You have to be ready and prepared for any, even properties that are stabilized that individuals buy. They've been renovated. Great, cool, but something can always go wrong. And I always tell people, you got to prepare for the worst more often than the good, right?
Right.
Because when you only just prepare for the good and then bada bing, bada boom, my pipes froze, that's $20,000. I only have 10 and my tenant upstairs is, he's out of water. Like it could be a situation that could put you, I wouldn't say in like a tricky, but it's like, okay, I'm tight on cash flow because I didn't have the money to begin with, but they gave me the deal, right? Instead of, I got the deal, I had the money, but I had extra money as well. It can all be like so many different scenarios, so many different situations. But as a loan officer, that's what I look for. I look for the extra cushion. Are you prepared for anything?
Exactly. And most of them, the lenders is a loan broker, they look for that. And that's something you all always say to us because you want to see if they got that reserve. That's basically what you're looking for in real estate investing. So a lot of people, like I said, again, we talk about the insights because you and I both deal with it, but the people that come to us, or definitely to come to me, is that they're not understanding, just 30% down, and then you got closing costs. They would like to see, about 3 months, 6 months of you actually haven't been able to make the note. Those are things. So if you're getting in it, you have other people that tell different stories that, oh, I didn't pay that, I didn't do this, I didn't do that. And be honest, you don't know what they did until you actually see the settlement statement to see what was all done. So what we have to do is basically just take for to understand with this and with you're talking on that you got to have part of your budget is not just your down payment, but incidentals. And also what you need to have is that reserve, because anything can happen that you did not know about if you get in this real estate game and getting funding. So that I definitely agree. So that's definitely a good answer for us. So let's go on to some more that we'd like to ask you about, which is when it comes to funding opportunities that you've seen, what has been especially successful for borrowers in real estate? What type of funding, short-term, deferred? I mean, what do you think that's really been successful for them that you saw that's pretty good?
I've got a mix of investors that some focus on just short term, right? Okay. Buy a property, stabilize it, sell it. I've also got a good mix that they don't want to deal with fixing property. They just want to buy a property that's stabilized, that's got rehab. They want to get a tenant. That's all they want. But more than anything, I feel like the best approach right now would be short term, right? Because as you give funding for it, it also gives you the experience to manage a project, to manage the property. And in my opinion, when you're able to do the rehab portion, right, after funding, you get it all through. Basically, you're ready to manage that property with a tenant, right? Because basically, you already got the hardest part done. Now it's just like, okay, now I got to get a good tenant in there. You got to do your due diligence. You got to run credit, background, collect security deposits. So short term to me is the way to go, right? Because you know the ins and outs of the property. Mm-hmm. You were there for the project from, hey, I know exactly when these pipes were changed. Do not tell me there's a problem because I was there. Right. Do not tell me something's wrong with the roof because we changed the roof 3 months ago, right? Mm-hmm. So funding short term to me is the best way to not only get your foot in the game, but also get that management experience. Mm-hmm. I think the most important thing that comes with that is relationship building. And it starts with getting funding, right?
Exactly. So with that lender,
having a good relation, not also, let's say with a lender, but then after that, right, you need a GC. Are you going to do the work yourself? Are you licensed for electrical work? Are you licensed for this? Do you know how to pull permits? So now it's like relationship building on an overall basis to get this project done, right? And the short-term funding gets you started, which is kind of ironic because a lot of people just think it's rehab. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to put 30,000 in, and I'm going to make a killing. I'm going to make 30 grand when I sell it. Okay, cool. But you don't see the overall aspect of what you're doing, what you're managing. And it all starts with getting short-term funding for a property.
Right, to start off. And like you said, it takes that team. You have to develop the proper team, like you said, lenders and contractors and those types and subs to work with you, electricians and plumbers. So we have to have that team kind of build up, to work with us when we going into that, because it is a business deal and you have the funds that are available, but you also want to make sure you complete that project. How many projects have you had and we know of that have started but didn't finish? You see what I'm saying? So it happens.
So far I've closed, since I started, just a little background. I've been 9 years in the financial sector, but for the first 6 years, I was in wealth management. Mm-hmm. And then I moved over to real estate. So since I've started about 3 years ago, I've done about 175 transactions. Mm. And so far, 0.
Oh, that's good.
They've all finished. If somebody was late on the payment, I got on them. I'm like, hey man, I need you to make this payment right away.
Mm-hmm.
They're like, hey, what happened? This and that. You're short on money. All right. Let me talk to my servicing department. But more than anything, when I get involved post closing, most loan officers here, or I would say overall, like once a deal closes, it goes into servicing. But to me, it's like, okay, I originated that loan. I want to make sure that the status of it and I also want to make sure that everything is going well. So sometimes I'll do calls. I know this is a little rambling. I'll do calls like, hey man, how's rehab going?
Right.
And then they'll tell me, I'm a little behind. I'll tell you one of my projects, or one of the loans I originated down in Tampa. Last year I originated April. Good deal. It was almost $496,000.
Mm-hmm.
It was a single family with an ADU, and it's about 3 miles away from the beach.
Okay.
My borrower was going to make a killing on it. The numbers came back good, but what happened? Two hurricanes came by. I forgot the name of them. So many hurricanes go to Florida. I can't keep track.
Right.
Permits, the city pulling permits, it was a disaster. After that, she went through like 3 GCs because she's a New York real estate investor that says, okay, I don't want to be in New York. I don't want the cold anymore. So I'm going to go down to Florida.
Right.
And this is the property I'm going to start with. So she doesn't have her team from New York is not the same team down in Tampa. So
exactly.
It's about those relationships. It's about managing the project. And more than anything, I want to make sure that things are moving fairly. And if I'm able to get involved with servicing and be like, hey man, let's push for this extension. I don't want this loan going into default, right?
Right.
As a loan officer, they do keep track of us here and what loans go into default. Obviously, sometimes we can't control everything, right? Sometimes individuals don't have the funds or don't have the capacity, or they gave up, or they sold the properties as is. Nothing I can do about that, right? But to the point of the extra liquidity, I would say 85% of my loans, if the estimate tells me bring me 50, I have a borrower that's bringing 65, 70 to liquidity. So that always helps in the long run, right?
Right.
And when I see my deals and a good percentage of them are in good terms, that makes me comfortable, because my borrowers, not all of them, I would say, listen to me, but maybe some take a little bit of detail when I talk to them, right?
Right.
A lot of times, the more seasoned investors, out in one ear, out the other, kind of the newer ones, they kind of listen to me a little more. But I take pride in making sure that my deals make it to the finish line. And I've had some deals where customers halfway, hey, I couldn't finish. I sold the property. Okay. You didn't go into default. That's all I want to hear. Loans paid off.
Right.
We're good.
So basically, like I said, like any business, you have your pros and cons. It is just basically the best if you are just prepared for most. And like you, we work on that relationship too. So we've actually heard a lot of stories of what people go to, because we deal with contractors directly a lot, and we hear the stories of how jobs are folding and what's happening, just because, like you said, one, you didn't look at your budget. You didn't take in consideration of what could go on. So that's something that all investors need to be sure that they pay attention to that part and make sure that they do that as well. So I think that's something that's really good that you talked about, and I appreciate you bringing that forth. So what I wanted to ask you also, I know we've mentioned it some other times when we talked about some top funding tips that you've given, and you mentioned getting with other investors in your market. So tell me about why that's a good tip and why you think people should do that.
I said that before because I'm a strong believer that you gotta pick at the more seasoned investor's brain, right? So if you're starting out, you want to see what the seasoned investor or what the the individual next to you is doing, right? So let's say down in Dallas, you're starting out, you're like, okay. How do I start? What do I do? They got conventions, they got conferences, but once you build relationships and you're able to see what others are doing in your market, you can make your own plan. And when I say make your own plan, you're not going to just try to copy A through Z from one investor. No, you want to take A from them. You want to take B from them. You want to mesh it to where you're comfortable delegating what you want to do, right? So whether it's flipping, whether it's buying real estate land, whether it's buying long-term holds, what do you want to do? What are you comfortable doing? And you have to take a look at the market around you and see how things are doing.
Right.
You know, I sometimes I'll get scenarios from new investors. Hey, I want to do this. I want a 300 grand project. I'm like, take it easy. How about we tone it down? Give me something around 150. What kind of budget are you looking at? Do you have this? Do you have that? Are you in a renter's market? A lot of people don't know that some cities are more renters markets than others. So when I say this, I mean, okay, when you flip and you sell and an investor comes, there's a high probability that they're going to get that place rented faster when it's in a renter's city, right? So like, for example, I'm here in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut. This is not a big renters area, but when you go down to the metro areas, Boston, New York, Philly, we got up here, we got Pittsburgh, Portland, Maine, all these cities, they're more renters markets. So people are able to, let's say they lose a tenant, they might only wait 3 weeks, 4 weeks before getting a new one in, right?
Right.
So you have to see kind of what the market is, what you're doing, what you want to get into, short term, long term. Do you want to just wholesale? Do you want to buy vacant land and see if somebody wants to buy it from you because they want to do ground up? Make a plan for you where you're comfortable and where you feel that you're yourself and that you're not trying to just copy A through Z from this very successful investor. I see stories online. I see stories anywhere that say, hey man, I did this and now I'm making $1 million. Great. It worked for you. It's not going to work for everybody. So you got to be comfortable in your own plan, doing what you do, and look around your market, see what you're doing, see what's going to work for you, see what didn't work for them.
Right.
A big detail to take from investors is what didn't work out for them.
Right.
Did they lose on a property? What happened? What weren't they prepared for? What was their solution to it? Because a lot of times, a lot of people, they'll tell you your success story. They'll tell you their success stories.
Right.
Right? I want to hear when you messed up. I want to hear when things went bad.
Right.
I want to hear
you handle that?
How you got out of that. Because, hey, if you, like Kobe Bryant, if he got, if he went up for a layup and he didn't make it, he was coming right back down again and dunk on you. So it's what went bad, how'd you fix, and, kind of moving on from that situation, right? I think the best scenarios or the best investors learn the hard way. So it's good to pick their brain. Oh, you did this and it didn't work? Let me stay away from that,
Exactly. And that's just take that time and just meeting them. I tell our investors too, network is what you want to do. Also, when it comes to experience, something that I've noticed as well, and you know it too, if you want to get into new construction and you've never had a new construction deal, which means your name on the LLC that's on the settlement paper, not the fact that you actually did the work, but you're actually a partner in that experience is needed. And that's why I tell them, get with other contractors or get with other people that have already done that and be a part of their team to start off. And it may be a little
minority partner.
Right, exactly. And that's a great way to start to get in. So that is really good on those relationships that if you don't have the experience, like you saying, get with some investors that have it. And a lot of investors don't mind working with you to get started on something, especially like you said, being a minority, in it. And that'll help you where you can put that down as your experience. So it's a way to do it. Yeah. But we want to get out and see what's out there and get into that networking and learning from people, learning from your lenders. So much with Google. And I think you and I had talked about that Google and we talked about YouTube, or was that one of my other lenders? We talked about that YouTube. If you're a visual person, he said, go to YouTube and you can see the visual part of how to do things. If you're a person that likes to read, go to Google and they can send you to all kind of topics and stuff. So the help is out there for you, but you also have lenders and brokers like you and I that can actually guide you for your specific deal that you have. So with that saying, is there anything else you think that investors even starting out need to be aware of that's going on now?
So we're seeing a big trend of lenders that close shop and new lenders coming in offer certain types of products that look or hear or on paper look amazing. So I was doing 2 refis that got originated last year. They were down in, I think, Tampa or Jacksonville. I can't remember, but it was in Florida. And I was reading through their payoff, and it was a product, a short-term product, deferred interest.
Okay.
So a lot of obviously, if the folks don't know what deferred is, this is meaning you're not paying interest. It's getting accrued, and you're going to pay it at your exit, whether you're refining or you're selling the property.
Basically, like a balloon payment, interest, something
right?
like.
Yeah.
Something
essentially.
Like okay.
I mean, all short-term deals are balloon payments, but the fact that you have a monthly interest payment is a lot different than having it deferred at your exit, right?
Right.
So I was doing these 2 refis, and I look at the payoffs, and I just tell the borrowers, I'm like, hey, who told you this was a good product? Who sold you this? Why didn't they explain it to you? And he was like, hey, man, the guy, sold it. He said, you're not going to have a payment until I sell or I refi. I was like, okay, did he mention the deferred interest? Because every loan product is going to have an interest portion, right? Whether you pay it up front, whether you pay it monthly, whether you pay it at the end. That's how lenders make their money on short-term mortgages. And the values didn't come in for the properties. Their payoffs were extremely high. I think one of them was like 30,000 deferred interest. The other one was like 18. Wow. So that I think it was close to 50 for both of them. And I said, look, your appraisal values didn't come in where they should. You're going to have to come to money at closing. You should sell these properties.
Right.
I'm sure there's a big investor that'll buy them from you. I think it was Jacksonville, Florida. Big renters, big investors down there. They'll pick that up. Don't ever get into a product like that. So my suggestion on funding is do your due diligence, do your homework. Don't just go into any loan product. It can cost you money, right?
Right.
And when it costs you money, when you're starting off, I'm emphasizing a lot of new investors because I see so many new, young investors. I mean, I'm 30, but I think I'm a little seasoned myself, and they're so excited to get into the game.
Right.
But when it's time to dribble the basketball and go through drills, they see how hard it is. A lot of people leave. I had a few buddies. They wanted to be realtors during the peak of COVID. Everybody was selling. They were selling houses left and right over here, like it was a McDonald's cheeseburger. Everybody could sell. The market went down. Rates went up. Houses are on the market for more than 30 days now. A lot of people got out the game. Right?
Exactly.
It just happened.
So
for new individuals, even don't get into just any product. Read what you're going into. Make sure you understand. Make sure you ask questions. Like when somebody comes to me, they're like, Chris, what is this? I might be annoyed if I have to answer it more than 2-3 times, but I will make sure they know this is what you're getting into.
Exactly.
There's no terms and fees. I'm not hiding anything. We're not doing anything fishy over here. I did a refi cash out deal on my borrower down in Pennsylvania, and I did an estimate for him. And I'm like, look, these are going to be your estimated cash proceeds. This is what I estimate, but obviously I'm not estimating title. I'm not estimating taxes. So just beware, it might be less. Yeah, it was like $6,000 less because I guess Pennsylvania is just tax county. They tax a lot. So his cash proceeds went from what I estimated 116 to 109, but I let him know this might be different. This is just an estimate, and I'm always upfront with everybody on the products that they want to buy from us. And at the end of the day, when I see individuals excited about getting higher leverages or about this or about that, I just want to make sure they understand what they're getting themselves into, you know?
Okay.
Because it's important to me that your first project or whatever you get into in the real estate is successful, you know? A successful project, whether it be a flip, whether it be a long-term, whether it be wholesaling, whether it be you buy a mixed use, I always want to see success because that gives you the experience and that keeps you in the game. You know, a lot of people just give up. I hate seeing people give up, you know. I remember I did this flip when I started out about 2.5 years ago, and the individual did the flip, got paid. They're like, you know what, I didn't like it. I had some issues with it. I'm out. But I was like, you know, why didn't you look for people? Why didn't you ask for help? He just tried to do everything by himself, and it was, you know, I mean, he sold the property, he didn't go into default, but always ask questions, you know, from anywhere, from your lender, your broker. Don't get into just any products.
Right.
Ask
you want
questions.
to be
That, to me,
a lot more
investors need to ask questions when they're not sure about anything.
Right, and that's what it is. Well, I tell you, we're going to wrap this up because definitely you have brought some insight to us about the real estate investing lending. We do appreciate you on what you gave to us today. We look forward to you hopefully coming back sometime later to be a part of our podcast. So we want to thank them and also to our listeners. We want to thank you guys for tuning in. We ask that you stay tuned with us for all our sessions and sign up for it, subscribe to it. And you all, thanks again, and you all have a nice day and take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of TDJ Equity Funding Insiders Podcast. If you'd like to be a guest or get in touch with us, please visit our website at tdjequityllc.net/podcast or email us at podcast@tdjequityfundinginsiders.net. Until next time, take care.